Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it. Thanks to the Tamers Coalition for having me here. Really pleased to be able to attend today. And I'm going to be talking about flood recovery updates. And since we have so many people from out of state, I'll just remind everyone that the Front Range of Colorado received some pretty historical flooding in September of 2013. But before we jump into that, just a little background information. Colorado Water Conservation Board is an agency within the State Department of Natural Resources. Our sister agency is the Division of Water Resources. We have several sections in the division, and I'm in the Watershed and Flood Protection section. I serve as the Stream Restoration Coordinator, and I am a certified floodplain manager. Our mission, the keywords there: protect, manage, develop, and conserve water for present and future generations. And I'd just like to remind folks or educate folks that when we're talking about water from the state's point of view, we're talking about both non-consumptive and consumptive uses of water. So non-consumptive being our environmental and recreational uses of water, and then consumptive, more traditional agricultural, municipal, and industrial uses of water. Many of you may not know because you're out of state, but Colorado just released its first ever water plan. It was delivered to the governor in December of 2015. And while I'd like to say what I've been doing in flood recovery since 2013 is a big deal, it pales in comparison to this achievement that many folks in our agency were working on. I myself wrote Chapter 7.1 on watershed health. I bring that up to you guys today because our strategy in flood recovery is not unique. It's the same strategy that we use to approach watershed health planning and implementation of projects. Okay, let's jump into flood recovery. September 2013 was a 1,000-year storm event. That doesn't translate into 1,000-year flood events, but in many areas along the Front Range, we saw 100-year to 500-year floods. Very devastating. So immediately after the flood, came out with a strategy to start developing watershed coalitions. There's close to 80 watershed coalitions in this state, and there were only a couple in our flood impacted areas, and I'll put a map of that up next. So the first thing we had to do was get out there and start developing these coalitions. We got questions from folks: who's going to fix the river, whose responsibility is it? And based on the laws in this state, it ultimately came down to a private property owner or the property owner. That terrified many of us. We take a holistic approach to stream restoration, and having a hodgepodge of different types of projects out there was pretty intimidating to think about that. So we decided coalition was the best way to do it. Here's a map of those coalitions that were created. There's a lot of them up there. Some of them don't quite jive with the list on the right side. These groups have evolved a little bit in the past couple of years, but this was a heavy lift to get these guys together. And when we got them together, we said, hey, if you guys are willing to work as coalitions, we have funding at the state level to start doing watershed master planning. The idea there was to look at these watersheds that were affected by the floods, do an assessment, come up with a list of prioritized projects, and put a cost estimate to that. We knew that if we took this approach, we'd be able to shop it back to DC and get some recovery dollars to come into the state. And then we were able to shop this coalition idea to DC and came up with some funding to pay for staff, to hire coordinators and assistants to run these coalitions. And that's why I put this little Linus slide up there. It was a heavy burden, heavy lift on these guys, a lot of potential, and a very, very daunting task. We also got out right after the floods and did some emergency stabilization projects. There were some houses still hanging on the sides of banks that needed to be stabilized immediately, so we had some input on that. And now we're in the program management phase, where we are working on designs and implementation of these projects that we've identified in the master plans. So one of those programs, and CWCB and myself are on the working end of several of these, but the biggest one we have going right now is sponsored by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and it's their Emergency Watershed Protection Program. How many folks out there have worked with funds from this program before? Okay, just a few, just a few. Um, the big thing here is protecting life and property by stabilizing streams. It's a big program. There's 63 million for implementation alone. The NRCS covers 75% of that. The state's covering 12.5%, and the locals are on the hook for the other 12.5%. There's also roughly $10 million out there for technical support, used to hire consultants to help run the program and design the projects. The Colorado Water Conservation Board is the local sponsor. We're working directly with the NRCS. NRCS is getting off easy on this one because they just have to come to me when they have problems. CWCB has to work with all the locals out there to get these projects rolling. You may not be able to see the timeline, but this is going to run through 2018. It's a long flood recovery. Think back to September of 2013. I'm envisioning a leave of absence sometime in 2018, maybe 19. We'll see how this progresses. Okay, here's our timeline. And excuse me, I'm going to have to look at this so I can keep up with you guys. We contracted with NRCS in April of last year. We hired our consultants to help us run this program in December. That's a key milestone there. We put out an RFP and got proposals in, and we identified a team with key members. We had to have certain folks on this team to pull this off successfully. Floodplain engineer was a key member, a riparian ecologist, and we're going to have our riparian ecologist come up and talk about a couple of slides, aquatic biologist, and a fluvial geomorphologist. These are some of the key members of this team. Now, our team is going to be working to design many of these projects, but we're giving the local sponsors the option to come to us and ask for money to hire their own team to do the designs. We figured some of them, it's a daunting task to get out there and hire folks. Some of these coalitions, they had to ask what an RFP was. So it's a lot of work to get these folks ready to do design. So we'll design them, or they can hire folks to design them, and they can hire folks to construct them. Now, what we are going to be doing is looking at all these projects. If their designers are coming in, we want them to align with our philosophical approach towards restoration. Easier said than done. You put a bunch of floodplain engineers in a room, you're going to have different opinions on how that's going to work. And nobody likes to be told how to do their job. I have thought this was going to be a very easy process from the beginning. It's like doing a long distance hike. You know, you're going to start at one elevation, you're going to end at a higher elevation. Hopefully you make it. There's going to be a lot of negative elevation along the way. Nobody likes that during a big climb, but it's just part of the process. And if you make it to the end, you can show success. So what do we have out there? We have a lot of documents if you're interested in looking at this. And I do encourage you guys to look at this because I think the Emergency Watershed Protection Program is going to become more prevalent in the West, especially as we experience more natural disasters possibly associated with climate change. We have an EWP manual. Great idea to read this manual before the NRCS comes in and starts talking to you about it. There's questions you can ask them that they're maybe not clued in on, that they're maybe not fully aware of. So that's a good idea. We've got an engineering guidance document out there. It's really heavy on the concepts approach of natural channel design. It's worth looking at. We have FAQs out there. We get a lot of questions from folks, and it's not fair that just the squeaky wheels get the answers. So we try to collate all those questions and let those answers be available for all. Local match requirements, and of course the checklist that you need to proceed to the design phase and then proceed to the construction phase. Now we have a lot of multiple objectives in mind when we're doing these projects. Of course, protect life and property. That's NRCS's big push on this. How do we do that? We do that by stabilizing streams. If we're going to stabilize streams, we have to dissipate energy. How do you do that? You connect your channels with their floodplains. We're going to manage sediment. We're looking at depositional areas and source areas. Where are the sources? Where are the sinks? Don't turn a sink into a transport area. It may work for a couple of years, but it's destined to fail. Reduce hazards, improve habitat, and enhance recreational opportunities. So there's a lot of things in these master plans that we're trying to achieve. We've got some stuff coming soon. We're going to have a website out very soon, within the next month, I hope. A bioengineering manual. We're reviewing one of the last iterations right now. That's going to be very exciting. Some guidance on the in-kind match. That 12.5% from the locals can be cash or in-kind. There's a lot of materials out there that we'd like to use that have value. Rock, trees with root wads still attached to them. We're going to use that in our restoration. And then the process for ongoing assistance. The coalitions need a lot of support. They get a lot of questions, and they have different levels of expertise on those boards. Okay, just a little bit of science, not a whole lot, but I like talking flow regimes. I'll talk that with anybody out there if you want to chat about it. But the point here is just we're looking at a range of flows when we're designing these stream channels. And of course, we want to attenuate flood flows. You know, we don't want to destabilize these systems any more than they already are. But in Colorado, most of the time, we're way down here. We have altered hydrologies, especially in these flood-affected areas, lots of diversion, lots of uses. So how can we make the best use of the small amount of water that's available during the majority of the year? And we're doing that by looking at a nested channel approach, designing the stream, or even better yet, because we've had 2 big years of runoff, and these stream channels have done a lot to heal themselves. So how can we nudge these channels towards finding a stable form? And by doing that, we want to define low flow channels, bankful channels, and then of course, larger channels where we can to accommodate our flood flows. Now this looks like a nice picture, and this is a lofty ambition. There is a lot of infrastructure in these corridors as well, and there's roads. I'd like to remind everybody what this looks like. When you attenuate those flood flows, you're achieving 2 things. You're achieving more than 2 things, 2 big things that the folks I report to like to hear about. 1, dissipating flood energy, protecting life and property. 2, think about those low flows in the hydrograph. Right here, we're recharging the groundwater aquifer and have the potential to increase base flows later in the year. Okay, we've done a little bit of work with CDOT. We're doing a lot of work as we move forward. They helped us update all the hydrology, which was huge for this effort. And then they got us out there while they were doing some of their emergency repairs. This is what the river looked like when they were done with the road. And they said, hey, can you guys get your folks out here? I know we don't have a design, but you got to be able to do a better job than this. Yes, we can. We got out. And the key here was to take these little pockets. These are tight canyons. And there's not a whole lot of room, but take these pockets where we could reconnect the channel to the floodplain and take advantage of it. That's going to help the geomorphology and ultimately help the riparian communities. I like to put this slide up. It's a before and after of a project I did in South Park with a lot of other stakeholders. The top is 2008. The bottom is 2015. With a little bit of work on the geomorphology, looking at recurrence interval flows to get those elevations right, and a robust riparian revegetation effort, look what you can achieve. I could walk through this, across this channel before without getting my knees wet. Now you've got a wonderful thalweg in there and great trout habitat. The folks that own it are very pleased. So our goal is to try to do this as much as possible. Not a whole lot of structural elements in the channel if we can afford it. I know we're going to have to do grade control, bank stabilization, but if we could focus on geometry for the cross section, for the planimetry, and for the longitudinal profile, I think we can achieve some really good things. We do have problems with invasive. There's a lot of tamaris mixed in here. There's an estimate of 75,000 of these little guys on the St. Vrain in Longmont open space. But they can still be pulled by hand. We have a grant out to do some of this work. There's some nice natural re-veg coming in. Cottonwood's here, but these little guys have got to come out. And with that, I'm going to have Randy Mantle with Golder Associates come up and just talk to us briefly for a couple of slides. He's the riparian ecologist on our team.
How you all doing today? A little color commentary and Chris's talk. So as we all know, the 2013 floods were horrible things. And the effects of this we're going to be digging out for a long time. Basically, we've been working together with Chris, as Chris said, to put together a new bioengineering manual for the state of Colorado. We're very proud of this and have a whole series of collaborators. John Jordanango and myself have led the manual with people like Chris and a lot of other folks, Bill Spitz especially, I like to call out, Katie Ott, and Mike Lazowitz as well. So the whole purpose behind this manual really can be summarized as the following, is to provide guidelines for a comprehensive restoration strategy to keep everybody on the same page. Secondly, to incorporate design elements that are going to impart project stability. What have we learned? How can we best put it into play and help other people do it right? Third, when are the most at-risk portions of projects, and when's the greatest portion of vulnerability, and how do we address that through strong, proven recommendations? Fourth, we want to provide and understand how to apply the techniques. It's one thing to tell people what to do. It's another thing to help them actually implement it and make it work. We want to provide means of calibrating these techniques to the forces of water and gravity. As Chris said, these are dynamic systems. They're on periodic intervals. Some of those intervals are very strong, especially at the 50 and 100-year level. We need to adjust and compensate and design for that. And then finally, we want to create a searchable restoration matrix. And I've put together a database of 246 of our major species in Colorado. And this is kind of exciting. Basically, this searchable matrix, we've gone through with the input that many of you have given through the Southern Rockies seed network about what the prioritized species are. Secondly, we're incorporating over 50 searchable design parameters to be able to approach this. And this includes things like proper nomenclature, the county that you're in, what your hydrology is like, dry, mesic, wet, what your physiographic, morphological, and germination data. Basically, we're trying to offer different ways into this so people can wrap their head around it based on what their actual situations are. Included within this are root parameters, and this is very exciting, although it doesn't probably sound that way, because if you understand the root dimension, then you can plug these into stability and engineering equations and make it actually work. It also includes germination protocols and other information, and finally, it's going to be given in an electronic supplement to the manual. Thanks.
Okay, just a couple more slides. Thank you, guys. Why are we doing this? Why are we marrying geomorphic approaches with our revegetation effort? I ride my bike all over the Front Range, Colorado. We're very lucky to have a lot of bike trails along our stream systems, but I get to look at a lot of really bad implementation projects, and I take pictures of them over time. And this is one where it's an example of you've been better off not doing it. A lot of riparian re-veg in here, a great effort to get all that in. No thought at all to the channel geometry. It's just a trapezoidal channel in there. And these guys, a year later, we've got some erosion here, all the stuff planted dead, weeds coming in. The channel itself is trying to build a bar right here. It's trying to heal itself. And then you get downstream right here where the project ended, great riparian community. Maybe a chance there to look at it differently or not even waste the money if you don't know what you're doing. So we need to be out there working with folks to do this. And then finally, my last slide, I'd just like to remind people that not even in urban corridors and other corridors where we're doing restoration, we oftentimes have a tendency to oversize our channel and disconnect it from the floodplain, when really we should be looking at a channel appropriate for the watershed and oversizing our floodplain. You can't lose on that approach. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much. We have time for some questions. Favorite feature of the state water? Well, that would be the section I wrote, chapter 7.1. So I recommend looking at that. In there, we actually defined watershed health as a measure of ecosystem function and structure. And I thought it was a big win to get that in there. We had a lot of folks look at it, provide input on it. But now I'm not a rogue out there. I could say this is the state's definition for watershed health. Other questions in the back? Right, right. I think the better term is dynamic equilibrium, where you can have these patterns of deposition and erosion and appreciate that the channel is a dynamic system, but it can be stable within those changes, not static. So those are not to be confused.
And maybe you could repeat the question when they ask it, since everybody's faster than me.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I even remember, but it was what are we referring to when we say stability?
Follow-up question to that. I just wanted to ask what the engineers think about that.
Well, there's close to $90 million in implementation for this program, so they're all drinking the Kool-Aid. But the real challenge is as we're presenting some of these innovative ideas and some of these design solutions that my team have come up with, and they have the typical designs they've been producing, it is a challenge that some engineers are hesitant to put their stamp on it, which is why we're working with them and sitting down with them as teams to discuss these concepts. It'd be a real shame to avoid some new innovative stuff just because somebody's not comfortable putting a stamp on it because they don't have experience doing that kind of work. You got to take a little bit of risk.
What are the long-term prospects for all these watershed coalitions if they were established after recent flood events?
Yeah, great question. What we've been doing, and it's not perfect by any means, we came up with a funding source to fund the staff for 3 to 3.5 years. We've also been training that staff in not only flood recovery, but what it takes to run a nonprofit watershed coalition, or even just a collaborative that's not a nonprofit, but working through a fiscal agent. And our hope is that we'll give them enough information to continue on beyond flood recovery, because there's a lot of other issues in these watersheds, and they need to protect their watershed health, including their water supply. A lot of these areas are in fire ecosystems, so that's a continuing concern.
Other questions?
Right. Okay. Well, the question's about stream management plans, and that's something that we have in the state water plan in chapter 6.6. And a little bit of semantics here. We're calling watershed planning or watershed master planning more of what I was talking about, and stream management plans are putting a closer lens on that and looking at the flows and geomorphology that we need to support water uses and primarily non-consumptive, but I'll argue they'll benefit other uses as well, or consumptive uses. So that the state's take on that, and I don't want to get too deep and use up too much time. Happy to talk to you at the break. But is to really marry this concept of watershed planning with flow analysis. In that, in the simplest terms, what's going on in your watershed through land use and geomorphology, to look at that in conjunction in planning flow needs. In the slides that I showed where you have really wide channels with degraded habitat, if you just went in and did flow analysis and said we need this amount of water to achieve this objective, and you ignore the geomorphology, it's a big miss right there. We think that doing those in conjunction is very important. And then it's a stakeholder-driven process, and the state's adamant about that. There's different ways to do stream management planning, but if the state's on the funding end of it, we need it to be a collaborative process open to all interested parties in the watershed. We're not interested in producing plans that get shelved because they're too controversial and folks say cry foul because they weren't involved in developing.
Do you have any endangered species issues in your watersheds?
Yes, we do. There's endangered species out there. There's mice that like to jump in things. Generally, we have the tack that we're improving habitat conditions for them, but we still have to go through all the environmental to pull these projects off. There's also there's vegetation out there that's endangered, and I'm not so great with it. What's if you ladies tresses? Is that one? Yeah, I'm getting better. I've been hanging out with Randy a little bit. So we're using federal money, so we have to go through the federal process to implement these projects, and that includes all the environmental work associated with it.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you guys very much.